All right, viewers, let's begin now with the biggest exclusive, the world exclusive that we're going to be playing out right here in India today. Now, Afghanistan in strife, the biggest voice has spoken to India today. Amrullah Saleh, who is currently the caretaker president of Afghanistan, spoke to us exclusively, laying out his battle plans against the Taliban. Saleh says that the resistance against the Taliban is going strong. He also said that he will not allow Afghanistan to become Taliban. He also said that negotiations are on with the Taliban. He further added that people of Afghanistan will reject Taliban as they don't want their identity that has been built for 20 years shattered.
Mr. Saleh, you have been a part of the resistance even earlier. You look up to Ahmad Shah Massoud, the legendary Tajik commander. How is the situation different from the first time that you were resisting the Taliban and now?
His son, Ahmad Massoud, is currently in the headquarters of his father, and people are rallying around him. I am also here. We have a very united command structure. What is key in situations like this is the motivation. It's the self-determination of the people. And secondly, it is the organization, command and control structure. And the last is resources. The first two elements are critical, and we have it already. We are not fragmented, we are not disunited, we have a historical unity, and we all carry the legacy of our leader, and we have told the Taliban, the choice will be yours, and if you opt to fight, we will see you. If you opt to negotiate, we do not want the negotiation to be, as I said, a disguise for soft surrender or expression of allegiance or acceptance of the Taliban clerical dictatorship. Absolutely no.
Meanwhile, as the crackdown on freedom of speech and on women's rights continues in Afghanistan, we spoke to Saad Mohseni. Saad Mohseni is the founder of the first 24/7 privately owned independent news channel, Tolu News, which continues to function with women staff. Listen into this conversation. Mr. Mohseni, appreciate you talking to India today. Thank you there. So my first question is, because you're the best person to ask right now. You've got your network running in Afghanistan. What is the current ground situation in the country?
Well, the Taliban obviously is attempting to consolidate its hold over the country. There are pockets of resistance, as you've mentioned in your story earlier, that in Panjshir and Andarab and some other areas. So they have to consolidate that rule, and they also have to win over politicians, opposition politicians like Hamid Karzai and others who are outside, Abdullah, and so forth, and to an extent win the hearts and minds of Afghans. Given what's going on at the airport, the Taliban have realized that there's a sense of panic and they have to actually address people's concerns. And last but not least, they have to win the support of the international community, because Afghanistan is not just facing a political crisis, but it's also facing a humanitarian as well as an economic crisis.
Sir, before I actually ask you about the Taliban, your interaction, your network there, the interference, I want to ask you, we've seen a little bit of what's happening in Kabul. I'd like to ask you on what is happening in, say, the outskirts, what's happening in the Panjshir Valley. Is there a resistance shaping up? How far has the Taliban entered there?
The Taliban, as of last night, had not entered Panjshir. They had vowed to start their military operations. I think that was put on hold. The hope is still to resolve this through peaceful means, through dialogue. And I know that they were sending a delegation into Kabul to continue those discussions. Outside of Kabul, it's relatively stable, quiet. Reports we're getting from Herat, Kandahar, and Mazar-e-Sharif is that things are returning back to normal. Kabul, it's a little bit more, we have more issues in terms of the banks, which are still closed. Many of the shops are still closed, although smaller merchants have opened up and there's trade. A lot of people have not returned to work. So it's still a week on. There are still some nerves. Having said that, you see people on the streets, people feel safe enough. I think that the big concern was anarchy and lawlessness. That hasn't come, thankfully. Things, the situation is very fluid. People are wondering about the next government. The CIA chief was apparently in Kabul last night, met with the Taliban leader, Mullah Baradar. There's a lot going on. And a lot of questions. What's going to happen to the airport after the 31st? What will the new government look like? Will it be inclusive? Will it be broad-based? What's going to happen to the likes of Amrullah Saleh and Ahmad Massoudi in Panjshir? Much to worry about in the coming weeks.
Mr. Mohseni, how do you see things at the airport develop? Because we are seeing these terrifying visuals that are coming through. Are things going to get worse as the deadline closes in?
You would think so. Thousands of people who are waiting to get out, and we know that most probably will not be able to get out because they don't have the documentation. They haven't applied for the SIVs or the P2 visas. They don't qualify as individuals at risk. A lot of these people are just not well-educated Afghans who want to get out. So there's going to be a real scramble as the date draws near. And the concern we have is that whatever you've seen at the airport till now, the scenes, say, on the 1st of September or the 2nd of September are going to be far worse.
Well, that's quite ominous, Mr. Mohseni. But, you said things are right now relatively peaceful. We are picking up sporadic reports of violence, especially against women, where women are being picked up, handed over to the Talibs. Is there any truth, or is it just because at these times there's so much misinformation that also floats about? It's they're difficult to confirm or intimidation of individuals is something that happens in any country. The question is it much higher than it was, say, 3 weeks ago? And we're very careful in terms of reporting on these things until we've done our due diligence and have checked the facts. I'm sure that there are incidents like this. We've seen it in the provinces. The UN has reported on these, the Human Rights Commission and so forth. But the question should be, is it institutionally sanctioned actions by members of the Taliban? And that's difficult to ascertain. As a matter of fact, you would struggle to find any evidence of that. But nonetheless, we've been told, certainly by the Taliban, if there are reports like that, and we're, by the way, free to report on these things, that they would deal with these issues. They're already dealing with people taking, for example, there was this tradition the first few days of people walking in and taking people's vehicles. That has slowed right down. People have had assets returned to them. So for the Taliban, I think taking over this country is also going to be challenging, and they're already facing these challenges. I want to talk a bit about Tolu News, Mr. Mohseni, because you're walking a rather tightrope. You're independent media. You're technically to speak truth to power, which is truth to the Taliban here. Are you talking to all sides of the parties? Are you talking to the Taliban? How are you doing it?
Well, it's a funny situation for us to be in, because the Taliban have not quite taken over the country, the government. They don't have ministers, there's no president, there's no cabinet. There's some caretakers across the city, but nothing like a proper government. So we have to wait for them to come in before we can actually judge as to how they behave towards the media. Right now, we're reporting on all sides. The situation in Panjshir, for example, we speak to people inside and we speak to people outside. And the same with many other issues around the country. They keep saying that they will allow organizations such as ours to continue with our work, but only time can tell.
Do you have faith that will happen?
We deal with facts on the ground. The proof's in the pudding. We'll let their actions tell us in terms of how serious they are.
All right, viewers, let's quickly move on. A vaccine approval for children above the age of 12 years in India is now going to take place, but there is a caveat. Children will not be getting vaccines anytime in the near future. What is the rollout plan? My colleague Sneha with more.
If you have a child without comorbidities, you will have to wait until next year to get the child a shot against COVID-19. This is what has been planned by the government. In an exclusive interview to India Today, the head of the government's vaccine advisory panel has said that, like in the case of adults, India will be prioritizing children too for vaccines.
Below 18 years, we have around 42 to 44 crore children. So at the moment, till adults are immunized, we will prioritize children with comorbidity, even with 2 years onwards, all those who have comorbidities. And subsequently, once they are there, in the first quarter of hopefully in 2022, all children can be offered.
Here are the demographics of the unvaccinated category in India. There are 12 crore children between the age of 12 to 17. 1% amongst them have comorbidities. 44 crore children are between the age of 2 to 18, and this group is eligible for Covaxin. The government will identify the list of comorbidities and share the list with states before the actual rollout happens. Right now, this list includes ailments like tuberculosis, cancer, transplant patients, and children with immunodeficiencies. Are the comorbidities going to be very similar to what was earlier identified for the general population also?
Yes, that's true, but there may be other, because as I said, congenital conditions, children are born with certain comorbidities, and they would also be essentially part of such lists.
Genetic disorders is what you're trying to say?
Yeah, one important example is congenital heart disease, for example.
Okay.
But we'll have a very detailed list on that.
As for the actual rollout, for even those without comorbidities, it won't happen instantly. But there are questions being raised on when will this actual rollout of Zycov-D for children start, given the limitations in the manufacturing?
The vaccine is likely to be rolled out in October, first week of October.
Okay.
And over next coming few weeks, we will prepare this list, and the state governments and the overall immunization system will prepare itself so that there is no difficulty for parents to bring their children and get them immunized.
However, like the World Health Organization, the UNICEF and global experts world over, the Indian government too says that children need not wait for vaccines to go back to schools. In New Delhi, Sneha Mordani for India Today.
Welcome back, viewers. You're watching a fact check segment where we bust certain claims masquerading to be facts on social media platforms and WhatsApp group. Now, there was an image which is floating about. You might have seen it on various social media platforms suggesting that a mosque in Pakistan was bombed by the Taliban. This image has nothing to do with Pakistan. In fact, it is Iraq 2014. And this mosque was bombed by the ISIS in Iraq 2014. With that fact check, time for us to go into a quick break. To stay with us. Up next is To The Point.